David, welcome to the Netherlands. Great to have you in the same room again, and it's awesome to have you back. Episode 53 was our last episode, which is, I don't know, 6 years back? I have no idea. It's so cool to meet you in person again and record the next podcast with you.
Yeah. In fact, I think our last podcast was during COVID, so we were still remote.
What has happened since? I mean, you were still working in the uni or in the college in Purchase at that time, and now you kind of live in Europe.
I live in Europe now. Yeah.
Tell me more.
I think I started to begin to think about that in that year. And I don't know if it came up in episode 53, but I know it was on my mind and came up in other conversations. So you and I met at this place called the College of Extraordinary Experiences, which for me was a major kind of coming out party into the world and meeting people who I didn't know existed with jobs and positions, including yours, head of innovation at IKEA, which I didn't even know until the last day that we were all leaving. We'd already become friends by then, so it was too late to be afraid. And meanwhile, after that, I just began to continue to develop friendships. Then COVID hit, and when COVID hit, suddenly I was a theater professor teaching theater without the ability to be in a space with people. So because of the College of Extraordinary and making all these friends remote, I understood what Zoom was. I understood what teleconferencing was. So I immediately both took my classes into not just a Zoom main room, but into multiple, used to call them digital excursions, day trips. And we would go into the emerging forms of sort of desktop virtual reality. So Rec Room and Mozilla Hubs and a few others. And to facilitate my teaching, and everyone was home and everyone was kind of like lost at the same time, I used the opportunity of LinkedIn and to just reach out to people I didn't know and say, hey, can you give a theater professor some help here in figuring out how to iterate out of this? So I started iterating both creatively, and it was right at that time that we did that talk. So it was just at the sort of, it was just sort of in the embryonic form of who I was about to become, but I didn't know that yet. And a lot of those friendships led to more training, more conversations, understanding the relevance of what my background as a person who works in space telling stories, how that related to the emerging virtual and augmented mixed reality universes that were just in formation. So the idea of thinking about world building, immersivity, what it means to tell stories among multiple mediums, transmedia, all became now part of my teaching, part of my personal exploration, my artistic work, and also I think at the time I imagined that I was leaving the theater, like permanently. The work that I'd done just directing actors on stage was shifting out of that. And I'd begun to realize that actually was a prejudgment that didn't actually bear truth, because I do continue to work on stage, but I use lots of technology infused in production. I also begin to think that the kind of work that I do involves space and getting people to understand both how people interact in a physical space, but also the social space can also be non-present or digital, and the ways in which imagination plays a role across all of these areas. And that actually builds greater connection between people. Actually, what I went into theater in the first place to accomplish. So it wasn't actually leaving the theater, it was expanding the definition of theater in ways that continually give me a wry smile, because I had thought back 6 years ago that this was an either-or situation, but it's not.
What I'm super fascinated about what you mentioned is with the technology, how much you worked with the technology, like your project in China, and all these projects, they were not existing, like the way of thinking was not existing at that time.
No.
Maybe talk a little bit more about what you did in China, just for people to understand the context of it.
Okay. In China, we have a production company called White Horse Immersive, and it was around this time in 2020 when we met. We had already done a preliminary project in 2019 and left, and COVID hit. So we were working with Chinese companies remotely on designs. So I created a design for the China Eden project in Zhendao. I created a design for Ocean Flower Island's fantasy world, a fairy tale world, based in a story of a mythology of a magical story tree that involved lots of technology, augmented reality, but really not yet virtual. The project in Zhendao was the first time anyone asked me to think about creating a digital twin and using AI. And I came up with a very elaborate plan that did not get funded, but it put in my mind the idea of how could you create a relationship between something digital and someone remote and someone live in a venue. So that thinking, and I didn't understand the tech yet of how to do that, but now I do. So that emerged. So in China, the two productions that we're in the midst of right now, one is a project which is, it's a musical. It's a love story. It's based on Dante's Inferno, and yet it's all set in China between a gamer, his love, and her enemy. And the three of them actually play out their triangle relationship inside of a video game called Aurora. And Aurora is both a video game, but it is also an AI control system. So the actors, we see them on stage in street clothes playing the video game.
That's maybe important to explain, because it's not just a video game like you sit at home. It's a live environment video game with people on stage.
With people on stage.
Explain that. I think that's important.
Okay, so Li Wei, who's our lead character, is playing a video game on a controller that we've devised that doesn't actually exist in the real world. And as he plays, battling various monsters in the different structured layers of based on Dante's Inferno and the Seven Deadly Sins, but also adapted from the creatures are adapted from the Chinese book of Mountains and Seas. And these creatures are extraordinarily beautiful 3D creatures that were designed by part of our company's work in Ireland. So Ireland in China. And we see simultaneously to the actor playing the game in air, behind them is a motion captured live AI video of the actor's avatar in the game.
Yeah.
So we see the avatar in the game, real time, actor moves, avatar moves. And it's all in the classic traditions in the video game that we see. And as they say in the markets, but there's more. And that's the audience opens a phone app, and through that app, it's an AR app. They see the stage, they see the actor, they see
So they're in the room like a stadium.
Right, they're in a stadium, 600 seats, and they also see the creatures that Li Wei is fighting. They also can get to fight. So they see the creatures through their phone appearing, and they are not only shooting them, but the creatures are attacking back, flying over their heads in the auditorium. And currently we're using the mobile phone because it's the easiest, but it won't be long before we're into some sort of like glasses or goggles. So it's an experience where the actor is playing a role, the audience is playing a role, but there's more. As the audience plays, their way of playing is calculated, so it ends up running through the Aurora game system and tells the actors at the end of each round of battle or each round of the game how the audience feels or thinks they should behave next. So there becomes a feedback loop between the audience play and the actor response. Sometimes in change of script and improvisation, sometimes in change of the way the actor plays the next scene. But there's an immersion of interactivity between audience, stage, and the technology.
Yeah.
And insofar as it's still theater, with music, incredible ballads and songs. Technologically, it has taken augmented reality and mixed reality and gameplay into what I feel is the emergence of a new medium, because it's a hybrid, both game and theater.
Yeah.
And highly entertaining, meant not only as a beautiful artistic expression, but as a commercial vehicle, which we have at this point about $1 million US investment in it, so that it establishes itself moving into a tour across China.
Yeah. The interesting thing for me on this kind of concepts, as an innovator, what you often see is creativity is starting at the edge. So there are certain things that are starting at the edge where technology merges with like the human elements, like you just explained. But the interesting thing is, and you do that already in a commercial context.
Right.
But I'm always thinking at it from a business perspective.
Yeah.
From a business perspective, this are leverages that you can utilize to do business with, but also to embed in an organization in a completely different context.
Right.
Where you have a technology that's evolving rapidly. I mean, when we met last time, AI in the context of like how we use it today in 2026 was not available at that time for personal use and business use, at least not widely. I think there were a couple of people already playing with it, but not to that extent.
Yeah.
So the ChatGTP, what was it, 3.0 moment was after that.
Yeah.
But that means the technology is just getting better in the context of what you did already in the early stages of this project, and it's going to rapidly change, which means if you have this immersive theater experience, the AI that is utilized in this, and most probably way more technologies, but just double clicking on the AI, it's getting smarter and smarter and faster and faster. And with the compute that is connected to it, you can do so many things in a commercial setting as a business. And I think that's, for me, it's fascinating because there are so many opportunities that, especially the world where I come from, which is corporate business, the corporate world, and which is inherent and slow all the time. So it's always lagging when it comes to technology. I think they can leapfrog certain things if they just look at this kind of things on the edge and then say, how could we embed that into what we do?
And also, the creatives who often come from a culture, as I did, where you think of putting, basically leaving, putting everything on the table.
Yeah.
And rather than seeing that as the step one of a business plan, because the arts are an extraordinary place for doing R&D for a demo.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is, yeah, but if the creative actually understood the value of what they were creating in contexts, in different mediums, in different sectors, they could actually get different types of investment, different types of leverage, and actually take a project which, so many of us in the arts have put it all on the table, and the final show comes, and it's depressing.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of problem in universities where like everything is about the graduation rather than the extension of now you've learned this, what follows?
Yeah.
And how are we part of that, ongoing relationship with our alumni? There's scant little done in that regard, and there's scant little done in the extension. And I think part of it is this real false equivalency in the arts and in education, that we reach these like conclusion points rather than inflection points, and not recognizing that there's a world that actually that we don't understand enough in the creative era, the creative field, what our real value is. So we undervalue ourselves, we underprice ourselves, and we think about working for someone rather than being an entrepreneur and actually taking on the risk, which we're already doing anyway.
Yeah.
But, somehow, there's this idea of like there's some sort of papa who's going to actually make it okay for us to be the child. It's actually no, that's not the case. You have to be papa and child at the same time, or mama. I mean,
Yeah.
so I think that's a major pivot. And now you're beginning to see creatives. You're not beginning to see. I wish you were beginning to see. In some places, I should say, to be more accurate, you're seeing introduction of entrepreneurship into arts training, because ultimately the school is not just educating, they're actually making an investment in the future of these people, not to mention this culture.
Yeah.
And that relationship kind of stopped with this high emphasis on individualism.
If we take your experience, if we just look at the last 10 years, so you have obviously worked a long time in the US.
Yeah.
You worked in China, and you now work way more in Europe, at least the last half year.
Yeah.
What are the differences? So would Aurora in that stage where it was, I think the Chinese understood the commercialization opportunity of it in a different way than the Americans and or Europeans have seen at that time, at least. Do you see differences in that? Do you see opportunities for other parts of the world?
I have a strong feeling about why China, as opposed to not why US or why anywhere else.
Yeah.
In China, certainly seeing opportunity is key. It's their drive towards innovation and opportunity. They also don't pick the companies and pick the kinds of companies that will be successful. But they do make lots of investments. Now, not only the corporates, but also the government makes lots of investments. And one of the things that they are interested in is how technology and human life and values and culture will emerge together, not separate. And so there's a question that gets asked a lot in China that it's not asked the same way in the West. They will ask, will people like this? Now, in the context of producing theater or film, that is not a question. The question is, will this make money? Will this have a big opening? Will this actor produce the people to come to the theater? What is the return on investment for this much you put on the screen? Will people like this? If you introduce that conversation, be like, well, yeah, of course. Will people like this? Will they pay money? But in China, it's actually the first question. And then it'll be, what is the risks of it? And what are the costs? And what are the potential? So the investment that I've seen in China has much more to do with not only will people like this, but will this reflect well on me that I funded this? Will this bring me the appreciation, the status to have been part of something?
Yeah.
In the West, people think, oh, that's censorship. No, it's a different value system, and it's much closer to my value system than the sort of more just making money. And making money is not a bad thing, but if it's the motivating factor, somehow you actually might not make money.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and I think like the best films, the best plays, they had a stronger intention, and people caught not just the work, but they caught the intention, the human intention, and it didn't matter whether it involved technology. It mattered is like, was this made for us to value, right? And not just like it, but to value. Yeah. That's the difference.
It's interesting that they have a different perspective of the future with that as well.
Yeah.
Because they like you said, the value set is different, and through that, then they're just looking
Right.
into the future in a different way. Talking about future, one of the things we have talked the last couple of months a lot about, I mean, weekly, is future readiness.
Yeah.
And I would love to explore together what future readiness is. So I think there are a couple of perspectives of future readiness. Let's start maybe with like personal perspective.
Yeah.
Looking at it from my perspective right now.
Yeah.
So it's me. How am I future ready? How do I make sure that I'm future ready? But also, how do I enable my daughter, as an example, to be future ready? Because I'm obviously biased with all the technology and business stuff that I'm doing. Is if we just take one example, AI is coming. You basically cannot switch it off anymore, or I don't think we are going to switch it off anymore. So that means for myself, how do I take a perspective that I at least start learning, immersing myself into the future in trying to understand. That doesn't mean that I have to like everything, and but if I try understanding and then leveraging it as a tool, if we keep at AI, then I will be more future ready than if I wouldn't. Let's say if I block it completely out, and I've seen that as well in big corporate. But let's stay on the personal level. What's your perspective on that?
If you go into an environment that is new to you, different country, different natural space, you're in a forest, you're floating around underwater with a snorkel, right? Whenever you're in a new environment, the human being immediately snaps into a form of presence. And suddenly every sense is aware. And the last thing you would want is for any part of your vision to be blocked, to be like with the horses, the track horses, they put blinders on them, right? And so if you are fully present and you are capable of catching everything possible, including the things that don't make sense, right? You navigate with a form of readiness, right? But in fact, what happens in society is we have certain truths which are actually, so firm that we don't believe it. Like the idea that, there is no such thing as the United States without democracy. Well, we're suddenly recognizing that this is actually something to be aware of. And some people respond, some people freeze, some people and that happens, in a society, it happens in a business, could happen in the idea that somebody has, I'm going to study this, all signs that are, this is not true, I will block. Now, once you do that, you are vulnerable. If it's in the jungle, it's to being eaten. If you're in the ocean, it's to being eaten, right? But you're also not driving well if you're not fully using all parts of peripheral vision, what sound is going on, what's happening all the way down the road. That is what humans understand as readiness. So future readiness is an extension of readiness. It's just looking out a little further, deepening the periphery without losing what's right in front of you, and forecasting, right? And knowing for sure that you will not be able to know for sure, because the future, by definition, is a crisis, because it's an unknown.
Yeah.
If it turns out well, okay, fine, that wasn't a crisis. Maybe it's somewhere else.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to be paranoid, but you do have to be present. And right now, AI is this crisis, and it's only a crisis because we've not included it in what we're ready for.
Yeah.
And while we don't know where it will go, there's a lot about what will be happening that is in the at least near future that we're actually not practicing, rehearsing, preparing for. So a future readiness stance would be one where it's not so much, crystal ball, Nostradamus. It's much more a factor of how am I standing? What am I listening to? How am I provoking myself to, with things that I don't believe will happen? What if they do happen?
Yeah.
Let's practice that.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's take that from a business perspective.
Yeah.
So if we look at future readiness from a business, how can a business in that context, let's go back in my corporate career. Mm-hmm. I have worked in several large international organizations with multi-billion dollar of revenues. And some of them were better in getting future ready at that time, at least, than others. What I have seen, in the end, it goes back always to the human beings. Mm-hmm. The starting point was always there's someone who is curious about the future and understand that what you said, there will be crisis coming. We don't know which crisis, but there might be a multiple of potential crisis. And if I can foresee that, then I can prepare different scenarios and can try to understand how we could react.
Right.
And you can do that in theory, which a lot of people do, and now they use AI and trying to do it. Mm-hmm. But the tricky thing, what I have seen in practice, being inside of an organization, theory doesn't help you.
No.
So as an example, we did a project where we looked into building a different business model on the edge of the organization. And it took us weeks and months to be immersed in the details of that project in a live space, retail environment in that context, mm-hmm. where we needed to be there. We needed to interact with the customers to understand if our assumptions and the ideas that we have are even at least close to what is possible. Right. And I think that's, if we go back to the other companies that definitely don't do that, they're in the today, but they're even not looking at tomorrow. They're just happy to survive today because they're in reaction mode all the time because the pressure from the outside is so much. And for me, it was always working with innovation. I was always saying, of course, because you haven't done your homework like 5 years ago. So now you're forced to react, right, because you haven't done the work before. But it's then so hard to stay, okay, but how do we get ahead with our thinking? How do we go ahead and get the future readiness today if we haven't done that the last 20 years?
Right.
So looking into that, how can organizations, what are the different toolboxes from your perspective that organizations can leverage?
Before you get to that question, there's a bigger problem in education and in corporate bringing people into companies, which is creativity and imagination are devalued. Not only not taught, but devalued.
Yeah, and sometimes even worst case, they are not wished to be there.
They are not wished to be there. Okay, so now essentially you're asking someone to do work with hiding whatever real skills they have to help the future of the company. Okay, so now you've got that problem. And then you've got this other problem, which is people don't practice through immersive learning versus like PowerPoints. So PowerPoints, we know this. The degree of retention on guidebooks and PowerPoints is very low compared to doing. With doing, it takes more time, takes more practice. People don't want to do it, especially in a culture which has devalued creativity.
Yeah.
I've just been working with one of the top tech companies in Europe right now. Actually, it's the top tech company in Europe, here in the Netherlands. And they're shifting into this immersive learning because the retention is weaker in the traditional learning.
Yeah.
To do that requires lean forward into human potential, whether that includes factoring in how AI now works or not. The human potential is key. Another understanding that I've gained from working with this company is there are two things going on simultaneously in manufacturing and in most businesses. One, there is the the creation of the product that is going to market, whether it's a piece of technology or whether it's a piece of furniture. Like the creation of that thing has a whole production system.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, there are people who work at this company, some of whom will retire, some of whom will pass away, some of whom will get other jobs, some of whom will move up in the company out of the positions that they had. So there's an ongoing challenge to maintain the level of quality of personnel, keeping track with the manufacturing or whatever the product line is. So the development of that personnel, both for replacement, but also the skills that they needed in this company 10 years ago, 5 years ago, are different. So now you have not only retention of quality employees from the other pieces, but also retraining simultaneously. So you have immense amount of learning needed, and setting up something like an academy within the corporation is too often that's not the plan. The idea is to bring in consultants who will do it, rather than consultants plus an in-house academy.
Yeah.
And because consultants don't have the knowledge of the company. Good consultants do. I pride myself in being that kind of consultant. But the degree to which you come in and really understand the company and how it sees itself, how it will see itself, like that kind of knowledge needs to be funded within a corporation, because while it doesn't appear that that's the key thing for shareholder value, it ultimately is, because if you can't produce, it's not necessarily about the machines that are either making it or being used, it's about the integration of the human and the manufacturing. And I think that's all sectors. So that requires a rethinking of why are we using humans at all?
Yeah.
Right? Because that almost is what you begin to feel like from when you listen to the Musk heads of the world, right? It's like at some point we'll just replace you. But in fact, that's not true. We're seeing companies laying off lots of people with the excuse that now we don't need them. But in fact, then they're rehiring them or they're retraining them because they actually can't operate. In some fantastic imaginary day where companies and society won't need humans to produce things, I think that's one of those ideological things that is not proven. It's a speculation, and it's a speculation that is currently reducing value rather than increasing value.
Yeah. And the key part of that is, so one part is the human element and the culture that goes with that.
Right.
But it also, in my experience, you need to look into the organization and even look into how do we need to redesign the organization. I was talking with that in my former episode with John as well, where the key part is understanding how do you design the company so that it is future ready in today's, and that means technology is going to evolve very quickly, as we see. I mean, the speed of technology development, even since we talked last time, officially, at least on the podcast, it's crazy how fast all of that is. And if we just now look, and it's going to accelerate even more with AI development and so on, that means you need to understand how do you build an organization where the human is enabled through different mechanisms, through different ways of thinking, to be future ready on an individual level, but also enables within an ecosystem of the organization to get the organization future ready as part of their role almost.
Right. Yeah. So developing their creativity doesn't mean you have them writing poetry.
Exactly.
Right. It doesn't. So it's like
I will never be able to do that. I'm German.
No, we have AI can do it now. But so the development of creativity and flexibility, resilience, these are skills that are not only teachable, but they're measurable.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of things that are, when with fear you invest in this, and it's all kind of like some sort of dark arts that are not, you couldn't put on a spreadsheet. But you can actually put them on a spreadsheet because you can look at the differences, like the differences between memory retention and use and incorporating things learned into things practiced, being hungry for criticism rather than fearful of criticism, because all criticism at its heart is additive. Like criticism adds to, right? Doesn't take away. Personally, it might feel like its criticism is a shaming or a bullying, but if that's the culture, there's value being left on the table that is not being brought into the system. I think it's partially why that kind of culture means that people, go hiring these major consulting firms,
and then fail.
But they fail because they actually have people who working.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember this at the university in New York. They kept bringing in consulting firms to basically tell us who we were, as if we had no idea of articulating that. So they came up with like these branding ideas and this everyone, you talk to people in these interviews and they took notes and they transform it. And it was like not a bad process, but somehow it was so externalized that it wasn't intrinsic enough to be meaningful, that we all felt part of something. And thereby the university, even though it's a university and an academic, it's similar to a lot of corporations, where the identity of the company and how it feels to work at the company are two distinct things.
Yeah. I still remember 2020 when I was building my first consulting business at that time, and I was always forcing not to be a consultant. So in the end, I was a consulting business, but I always had. I still remember I had the tagline, "The non-consulting company." Didn't work out, but the interesting thing, I was too far ahead at that time with my way of thinking, because it was all about how do you build an innovation ecosystem from within the organization.
That's right.
That's in the end what we are talking about today when it comes to future readiness. In the end is how do you build an engine inside of the organization so that you get to be always ahead of time and be flexible so you can act quickly if something is changing. And you can almost forecast the changes that are needed. To get practical, I have worked years and years and years in retail. And what I have seen with different organizations, in the end, you have a base layer. So if you take a retail store, there's a base layer of functionality of a retail store. You need to have the products at the right time in the right space. You need to have enough staff that is enabling the customers that come into the store to buy the right things that they need, and you help them in the best way so that they go from being a visitor that comes into the store to being a real customer that is buying something in the store.
Right.
And that sounds very basic, but it's all about culture, going back to what you said. If the humans that are in the store are not motivated, don't have the knowledge, are not interested in the customers that come, or visitors that come into the door, and the customers that are leaving the door, it's not going to work. It sounds super, super banal, but I know a lot of retailers in Europe, they struggle a lot right now because they don't do the basics. That doesn't mean they're future ready, but the tricky thing for them is if they don't get the basics right, they're never going to be future ready.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with culture and how do you enable the organization to get into the future. But that means you need to work on today, going back to be present and understanding when you're snorkeling, what are the things that are around you and how do I swim better with my snorkel and stay afloat and not be eaten by a shark or a crocodile, depending where you are.
And that's ultimately why, despite all claims that it's an irrelevant word, immersive still is the best word.
I agree.
Because in an immersive environment, clearly immersive, I mean, every day is, across the street here in The Hague, it's an immersive environment, right? So being aware, being present, right, requires perception, which if you say to yourself, this is an immersive environment, great. So now you're talking about a culture, and Well, we all know what that culture is, and we could write it up, and it's in our motto, it's in our value statement, it's all of that stuff. And great, but what is it actually like to work there? Can we study where people move in a space, who talks to who in a space?
Yeah.
Like really do a study of everything that is the culture. How much time do people take to commute? Like what are the pain that people suffer to work at the company in the beginning stages? At what point is there mentoring? All of that is the culture. That's the immersive environment, right, of a culture.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to do a training to get people better, ready, it first better get them really present, immersed in understanding what there is at the start.
Yeah.
Right. So like what you're saying is like they're not doing that. How are they going to be ready? Well, of course. So part of being ready is to really start from, day one or from scratch. Like here we go. And that's what are we looking at right now in the company? How good are we about all these things that we say we need to be good about? How good are we about the things that we have already in the company? And it's not just use of materials, development of personnel. It's also how are we responding to the daily interferences of things that are going wrong? Do we have a way to catch these better and like not make the same mistakes over and over again? Not hire a person who once again does something like that without being penalized or rewarded depending on what they did. So to go into a readiness, like a future readiness, like we've been talking about, the question is certainly starting from now with a really full knowledge of the company and embedding that knowledge into a form of immersive learning where people get to practice or rehearse how they behave. And in the workshop or in the development of the piece, we could actually begin to see, oh, look, you went this way, perhaps going this way. Let's try it again. Go the other way. Okay, try this. And like begin to actually play through the sort of grand assumptions that lead to fail.
Yeah.
And do it in a way that does not involve like the criticism that is harmful, but is actually additive. And that culture, the criticism is additive culture, can become something that generates enthusiasm, which is not a bad thing, engagement, an even better thing, and then preparation, even better still.
Yeah. I think out of my experience, I have been in many different transformations of many different organizations, and it's always either failing. Most of the time it's failing, unfortunately. But one key thing I have learned from that, and that's a lot of people say, yeah, that's obvious, start with the top. So a big transformational project a couple of years before we have recorded the last episode was how do we transform the organization? It was not called future readiness, but it's kind of to solve for the future. And a key part of that was you do workshops, you do different things, but it was always theoretical. It was not like I was explaining. You do an experiment at the site, and what you just said is you're testing, you're failing, you're learning, you get pushed back. Specifically not from the top management. The top management goes to an offsite. Every big company is doing that. They get the biggest and most expensive consultants out there, most of the time from the Big Four, because the Big Four are the credited long-term partners of these big organizations. And the board says, yeah, because it's this 4 letters or whatever the company is, we trust that the investment that we put into this executive offsite is worth it. What happened in every single organization that I have experienced over the last 20 years, the investment never paid back. The reason for that was it was theory. It was a little bit innovation game show or something sometimes. So if you had someone who is getting a little bit into that, they're at least getting the management team a little bit more let's say immersed, but it was never stress testing. It was never pushing them into a direction where I think in the world where we are in right now, linking this to Aurora, it's basically what you need the management team to do is have a stadium, have different players around, have immersive environment where the management team is on stage and is basically in the moment and testing all of that. And I think that's which would help the management team and top executives to get into that space. The question always is, are the companies ready to look into that and go that, or will they be pushed into that?
Yeah. I mean, you're referring to the stage, but I would use another word, the arena. Like if you're in the arena, you now feel the pressure.
Yeah.
Okay. And that pressure creates a different mind. It's the mind of a participant, right? Not an observer. There's no place to go sit with your coffee. There's no place to watch others and be critical. You're in it. And when you're in it, a different mind kicks in, right? It's the mind that happens when we are immersed in an environment, in a space that is as live as we are. Now, once you're in that, one of the reasons that, it's interesting about like the theater background is that most people, one of the greatest fears people have is not even violence, it's having to talk in front of other people. Like that is the number one fear. And it's one of the reasons I think actors have a certain kind of allure and glamour. Because,
superpower, yeah.
And like we'll say, oh, how did you learn all those lines? But really what we're saying is, how did you have the courage to stand up in front of people, you know? And, I'm not an actor, but as my wife, who is an actor, will say to me, oh, yes, you are. Because I'm very comfortable talking with small groups, large groups. I don't know what I'm going to say in a script, but I have it from years of experience.
Yeah.
But when I cross from the sidelines, right, onto the stage or into the arena, I'm in a game on mode, right?
Yeah.
And I can field any question, criticism of any other kind. And we see this with public figures who don't know how to be in public, which is extraordinary.
Terrible.
Now, that skill is not a rare skill. It's an ancient skill. We have, going back to, our ancestors who lived in caves, the one who comes back and tells the story and actually gets the challenges, of the crowd, or the cheers, one or the other, the oral tradition. Now, that requires not so much courage, although, you would say in a society that's largely fearful, that looks like courage.
Yeah.
But it just means aliveness. And in aliveness, we actually have all that we need, because that's what we need in order to be present. That's what we need in order to be listening carefully, immersed. And there's nothing like an activity or a game or a process like the ones we've been talking about developing that will challenge people. And of course, people don't want to be challenged. You're not going to be future ready because the future will be challenging, but you won't be prepared for it. But you can prepare for it much better if you're in an environment that is set up as an arena for you to react, where you can discover how you react, and you can now use tools like agentic AI to sort of support and defy, using red team structures, using contradictions, and respond real time to a series of shocks, moving through stages of crisis. And I don't mean crisis as a bad thing. Crisis as, it's called reality.
Yeah.
Reality is a crisis, right? Until the life is over, it's an ongoing series of challenges / crises. So what's wrong with being ready? We don't send people into battle without battle practice, but we send people into the next quarter without it. And it's similarly now, it's a different type of game.
And the key part of that is not just as an individual, as a team.
As
So
a
going
team.
back to the executive
Absolutely.
team is doing that as a team will give you the understanding how you behave in pressure situation,
Right.
which means if we just take an example, so the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the chief HR, digital, and like that team, the CEO will be able to observe, and they will all be able to observe themselves with each other when as hits the fan
Right.
and a crisis happens, which is happening all the time. How do they behave? And one of the things that I think is critical as part of that is being able to jump into different scenarios as part of that and on different time horizons. I was talking with the CEO the other day. I mean, it's already a couple of months ago when the Iran war started, because they were dependent on certain things that come to the Strait of Hormuz. And I was talking, so what's your scenario? Yeah, we are fine. Like the next 3 months is no problem. And so, okay, what's after the 3 months? And it's a multi-billion organization. It's a huge organization. And they have, I think that she said, like a 40% dependence on the material that comes from there. So it's okay, what is your plan B? And she was saying there is no plan B right now. They started then to build. I'm still in contact, so they built the plan B and getting there. But the business was hit already.
Yeah.
So, and yes, you cannot maybe forecast a war like this, but in the end, there were a lot of signals before that you could have had a scenario plan almost a year before
Absolutely.
to understand what are the potential scenarios. And in case that happens, same with COVID. We had a lot of problems with distribution. Ships are not coming. Electronics didn't work.
Yeah.
And maybe you cannot forecast that a pandemic like this happens, but you can look into stress testing the different value streams that you have in an organization on an ongoing base, where you say, okay, in case this happens and there's this value stream is not happening, we are not getting this raw material. If we are a production company, one of our suppliers is not be able to do that. And a lot of organizations have that in a mathematical perspective. They see that from a number perspective because the finance team most of the time is ahead of the things. They do forecasting, they do scenario planning. But when it comes going back to the immersive, the team of the management, they're not in that.
Right.
Team members are changing on an ongoing base. They have different incentive structures, which is sometimes completely against that. I think that's also going back to the organizational structure and how do you design an organization. It's all merged into this.
Yeah.
And linking this, going back to your consultants, I think if you take the big four or even the big 10, they're all not into this because what they do is their playbook is different. They take the examples from all organizations that they have worked with and the knowledge that they have gained over the last, 50, 100 years, and then look into what are the playbooks that we can replay with the same company again and can sell to them, and how can we do that so that we as an organization make the biggest profit possible. And I get that from a capitalistic perspective, but being like I have been inside of the organizations where these consultants had multi-million-dollar deals to change the organization. The answer is in the organization. The answer is always in the organization. There are so many smart people in any organization. Mm-hmm. You just need to bring that to the surface. And a lot of consultants just do that. Like they are asked a lot of questions, like you mentioned with the college, and then the internal team members, they're kind of put back with like, yeah, I could have told you that 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
With the salary you're already paying.
Exactly, without any additional. It's just that the organizations are not building something, let's call it Future Readiness Lab, where you build an immersive environment that enables, I think, starting from the top to build this kind of muscles, almost like different ways of working, different ways of thinking, different ways of stress testing each other, to be able to then act in today's situation, but even kind of forecast future scenarios, and how would we react as an organization in different ways to that?
Yeah, and back to the Future Readiness Lab, if you're developing the team, you're ultimately informing the culture from within.
Absolutely.
But let's talk about the meaning of the word team in 2026. The team is not only the humans. So,
Yes.
So once we begin to incorporate team members, human and AI, right now they don't work together very well. There's a sort of there's a weird secondary status either of the AI or of the humans. So integrating the culture of human plus AI has not been at the forefront of companies' agendas.
Yeah.
That's what I think what we're talking about addressing.
Yeah.
So in addition to, the key idea is bringing the team together in order to sort of build a resilience, presence, and ability to navigate the rapids, right? Years ago, there were corporations who would take people whitewater rafting to sort of like create a company culture. So we're kind of doing the same thing, but without a little drier version of it. So we don't need the rapids, but we'll create rapids for them in terms of a stepped process through crisis, through future shifts, and see how people respond to the bends in the road. And certainly things like the crisis in the Gulf of Hormuz were predictable.
Yeah,
Certainly there were. There are many things. Sometimes the future throws a curveball that no one could have seen, a black swan, to quote Taleb. But even black swans are just a lack of evidence that people hadn't been everywhere to see that there were swans that are not only white, right, as the metaphor. So black swan actually doesn't mean like a once-in-a-lifetime, comet, but even a comet you see coming, right? And a black swan you can find if you actually ask everyone, any swans there that might not be white? Like if you're not asking the questions, you're not finding out. So there's a lot of evidence being overlooked for lack of questioning, and teams are operating more as individuals in competition rather than as a culture of us or we versus a series of I's, and the compensation structures reinforce this. And that's all well and good for individuals, but unfortunately it means that they are standing on icebergs or ships that are sinking, because what actually needs it to run is the group acting in a coherent way. This is why we love these war movies. The war movies or any kind of film or story that's about a team, like the TV series that's like usually popular right now, The Bear, which just had its final season.
I've never heard.
Oh my gosh, you have to see this. It's.
I'm not a TV person. I am not watching anything.
You need to change that now,
Okay.
because there's the thing called The Bear. You have to watch.
I will check.
You'll be quoting it through many podcasts. Well, the thing about The Bear is it's one of these workplaces which people are all working against the central idea, and then over a series of 6 seasons, they actually find the rhythm as a we, and how they operate changes, and the relationship with the customers change, and you actually see it's not a fantasy, but we see it so rarely in life that it's deeply powerful, and it's gained huge audiences because we actually see what happens when a series of I's become a we. And that's, I think, what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And the we is not humans versus AI or AI versus humans, but it's bringing it together. So it's two things that are very powerful, and both of them very missing in the equation of future readiness.
Yeah, and as part of that Future Readiness Lab is not this executive training thing. I think it needs to be embedded into the organization, which is a self-improvement process over time. Going back to the example, because I think that's something that every organization should do, is having a mechanism at the edge of the organization where literally prototyping, testing something in sprint fashion, let's say a quarter maximum, where you say, this is a problem that we see, this is a problem that might occur in 5 years, in
Right.
2 years, in 3 months. How do we tackle that?
Right.
And then we called that at that time suicide squad. So we had suicide squads, and that we had tiger teams. Tiger teams are the teams that are kind of working in the known, and suicide squads are squads where the ones that are there to figure things out, and worst case they're getting killed. Obviously not in an organizational context, but their goal was to figure out the future, test and stress test it on the edge of the organization, which 99% of the organization is even not aware of, because the internal immune system of a large organization is always working against stress tests. It's always working against to keep the status quo.
Right.
And that's a human thing that every organization has. And we see this in politics and in environments, in societies as well. But specifically, if we talk about organizations, you need to push on the edge. And that's where I think this future readiness concept that we're developing right now is really all about. How do you get the executive understanding the importance of all the different elements we talked about, putting that into a financial concept so that the CFO, which at least for me is important, understands the possible upside of what it means to get future readiness. Right. Because what they always do, they do not always fear-based scenario planning, but quite often it is. They don't do opportunity scenario planning in a real immersive environment, and specifically not stress tested from all organizational pieces and team members. And then putting these things on the side where you say, let's develop different stress tests, let's develop different opportunities, and that can be in the now, in 5 years, in 15 years, but also 2040. What does it mean? Right. And then say, let's figure out how we as an organization would organize us in that way, but then as well, let's use AI and build AI, let's call it agent. That's the future customer in 2040. That's the future competitor. That's the future society in 2040, right, with all of these preconditions. Right. And all of that is possible today to construct in an immersive environment, going back to our Aurora example, so that you and your organization can stress test these things on an ongoing basis. So it's almost something that goes along the business, and it will be part of a business engine, strategic support, and even operational implementation straight away. Because most of the times what we experienced when I was in IKEA and we did these things on the edge of the organization, there are elements of that will directly improve the whole business. So right, you put that in and you directly see an upside on the bottom line. And if you do that smartly as an organization, it's just a recursive self-improvement towards a future readiness with a financial upside that then rectifies the investment that the CFO will give into the small, let's say, suicide squads. Because what we did as well, we were starving the suicide squads. They didn't have a budget. They needed to earn money because it was a commercial organization and retail. Understanding how you earn money as quickly as possible, like a startup does, right, is all not that difficult.
Yeah, and see, that's the mentality. A startup, has to do everything to capture a piece of the market, right? And it will iterate and reiterate if it's going to survive. I mean, there's nothing more ridiculous than a startup that's playing it safe. But like a startup that actually aggressively develops a kind of asking impossible questions just to see,
yeah,
right? Finding the weaknesses in competitors, finding the opportunities that is like unmet needs or things that other companies are just leaving on the table, yeah, because they're not paying attention. Like, doesn't have to be a startup. It's a kind of startup mentality, even for a grown-up business. And how do you get a grown-up business that has, established financials to actually have an edge? Because it's not for certain that their advantages remain, right? Because advantages like human life is temporary, right? It has its lifespan. Companies that were like as forever, forever would never be gone are gone.
Yeah.
And sometimes so quickly that it's breathtaking. I mean, in my life, it's Sears. Like Sears was like granite. And suddenly it's not even...
Explain what Sears company is, just for those that are...
Okay, so Sears begins like beginning of the 20th century, I think, maybe even earlier, and it does mail order. So it sends catalogs all over the United States, and you can buy from the catalog, and you can buy everything from a dress to a house.
Yeah.
And the catalogs begin to sort of create commercial industry, a retail industry through mail order. And they move from mail order to stores to digital, but then their digital strategy isn't innovative. And along comes these startups that go, Sears isn't doing it. So companies like Kmart and companies like Amazon begin to
Shopify,
wipe them out. They also have some really bad management as well, who acts, which just happens everywhere, but it's the kind of thing where they leverage the value of the company into debt, and then pretty soon the company's hollowed out, and it's basically real estate that's left and sold off for parts, right? And it was gone within so few years, and or AT&T. We use AT&T now, but actually AT&T is gone. A company called Singular bought what was left of AT&T and renamed Singular AT&T because the brand name was good. But the original AT&T, same thing.
Yeah.
Like, when they say AT&T is gone, people go, that's crazy. It's like, no, it's gone. The name exists, right? So there's a lot of things that happen, and we all know this. And so the pain of knowing how fragile, maintaining, you don't maintain success by attempting to maintain success. You maintain success by fighting for what you don't have yet and having the power to do not one thing, but two things. It's not unlike what I talk to, people going into the arts. It's not enough to be happy with trying to find success in one medium. If you're in theater, you also must know film, you also must know game design, you also must know how to sort of build projects within community. Like, you have to have all of the core skills, but multiple mediums, multiple venues, multiple demographics. And the more you have, the more robust is your plan. And that's for creatives, right? For on the business, it's actually the same thing. What are you not doing that you could be doing, or you should be doing, or the future you would wish you to have done now? Yeah. We cannot, it's not so much test, but we can recreate those conditions in an intense rehearsal process. I'm going to use the theater word. In an intense rehearsal process, which is basically about creating readiness. Yeah. Because as the poet John Keats said, readiness is all, right? Readiness is everything, right? What we don't know, we don't know. What we did know, we don't know now. But being ready, to be in that position of readiness, to be able to spring or to be still, that's the place.
Using this as the end of the podcast, which I think is beautiful. Mm-hmm. So if you're a listener, if you're someone that is interested in exploring the future readiness concept, which we're right now in the midst of developing and using this conversation for us to learn about it in the same way, I think it's interesting for boards of organizations. It's interesting for executive teams. It's interesting for people that work inside of the innovation and see that the organization is not there, like myself a couple of years back. Mm-hmm. Critical thing for those that are interested and maybe want to do a pilot project with us is you need to get the top management involved. You need to get the board approval for this, because if they're not involved, it's not going to happen. Doesn't mean we don't want to help you, but I think a critical part of, at least my experience, that the owner of the business need to be involved in this, because it's radically transforming the business towards the future. And if they're not involved, they will be fighting against it. So it's a critical part of that. David, thank you very much for the great conversation. I'm really looking forward to spend more time with you today in person and get the Future Readiness Lab into the world and helping many organizations and humans out there to kind of solve the big problems that we have in this world. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jens. Working with you and being your friend over these years, since even before our podcast number 53, has been one of the great pleasures and privileges of my life.
Appreciate it.